Hey everyone, it's Rob B here with Rob D, and you are listening to the Property Podcast. In this week's episode, it's the market update. We've got news of house prices, planning laws, mortgages, but for me, the big story here is one that nobody is talking about, a story that is crippling the construction industry right now and needs sorting out, and we reveal what that is in this episode.
Welcome to the Property Podcast. In case you don't know, we run a company that buys more than £100 million worth of property every year for our clients. You can find out about that at propertyhub.net/invest. And of course, as a result of doing that, we keep our eye on the news. But as Rob said, we also get to find out about things that are happening right now that will have consequences that will affect you that are not in the news. So we're going to round all of that up for you and tell you everything you need to know right now.
So let's kick off this month's market update with house prices. And house prices have fallen. Don't worry, it's nothing dramatic, by 0.1% according to Halifax. So very, very modest falls according to Halifax. And that now means that annual growth remains at 2.9%. So over the last 12 months, pretty steady stuff. What is interesting to me is the house price index, because we've seen more sizable movements here. And the most recent data that we have from Rightmove says that asking prices are up by 1.1% in the last month alone. That's a lot, and I'm actually quite surprised by that jump. It follows a jump in February as well of 0.5%. So the trend is upwards, and I find that interesting because sentiment, I would say, in the market feels a bit flat, but then people putting stuff on the market seem to be quite optimistic of what's possible, Rob. So to me, at least, it feels like quite a strong number compared to the general sentiment out there. I'm not saying anyone's panicking, but it doesn't feel as strong as over 1% rise in 1 month alone.
No, so then we'll have to follow it through and then look at the average discount to asking price, which isn't in this Rightmove update, but they do it every so often. So asking prices could be going up, but will average discount to ask then grow? We don't know. That discount to asking price didn't exist for a couple of years in the COVID boom. Then it went way out and they started to see big discounts, and that started to come back in again recently. So we'll have to see. We also have Zoopla data this month, which is kind of pointing to the same kind of thing. There's like a little bit of annual growth, not too much, nothing very exciting. But what it does point out is that there is a huge amount of stock on the market compared to the last couple of years. Sellers have got the confidence to list again because the market has got over the shocks of the last couple of years. But what that means is that buyers have bargaining power. So it's definitely a buyer's market. Buyers have more choice than they have for years. And you'd expect, of course, that to keep a lid on price growth. So put it all together and it's a pretty flat market. But something else that's in the Rightmove data, Rob, is talking about the conveyancing process and the logjam that's in the conveyancing process at the moment. 575,000 transactions somewhere in the process at the moment. So there are some busy solicitors out there. And of course, part of that is due to the change in the stamp duty thresholds, which has just happened. So of course, a lot of transactions brought forward to try to get in ahead of that change. So I'm sure lots of listeners will be tearing their hair out about how long things are taking, but they can at least know that they're not alone.
You may have missed this, but last week was the spring statement by Rachel Reeves, our Chancellor, and I'm pleased to say there wasn't much to talk about. It might not be great for the overall economy that there's not much to talk about. When I say not much to talk about, I mean not just for property, but for everybody. It felt like a complete non-event. But as property investors, I think we have to welcome that, being left alone again, which is nice. So nothing spectacular that's going to help the industry, but also nothing detrimental either. So at least we've been giving a break there. But Rob, outside of the spring's statement, the government has been busy and they've launched their new planning and infrastructure bill.
They have, and this is the big thing that's going to unlock all these extra houses that are apparently going to be built over this parliament. There's loads of stuff in there, most of it quite dull, so we won't go into it now, but the link to the bill and link to everything we're talking about today will be in the show notes if you want to go and look into it further. The bit that is most relevant from a property investor's point of view is probably the reforms that they're looking to make to planning committees. So obviously the planning process is a huge frustration to anyone who's doing developments. And what they're trying to do is streamline things a bit. They want more planning functions to go through dedicated planning officers without having to go to committee. They also want to slim down committees, speed things up, get decisions made faster, and implement mandatory training for people who sit on planning committees, which, come to think of it, it's kind of weird that you've got people on planning committees who haven't done any training in how planning works. So lots of things around the planning process. all of which I would describe as tweaks rather than anything dramatic. But Rob, I know from a conversation that we were having the other day that you've had an insight recently into a particular planning or development challenge, which is perhaps threatening that government target.
Massively threatening it. And this is something that you may have not heard of before, but it is big news to developers. And hello, developers who are listening. I know there's many of you. And the challenge that they're facing is the Building Safety Act, or more commonly referred to as Gateway. Gateway is a planning framework that developers have to go through if they want to build above 6 stories or 18 metres high. So if it hits 18 metres or goes above 6 stories, then they need to go through this process. This process is in place for safety, particularly around fire regulations, and comes from a very good place. The problem is it's not been delivered in a good place. In fact, the delivery of this, the outrolling of this, has been nothing short of disastrous. So much so that I know multiple developers now that are scaling down their schemes so they don't have to go through the Gateway process. So they are capping out at 6 stories, where they may have gone double or triple that previously, but they are scaling back what they plan to build because it's become a complete nightmare in getting these developments through. So to give you an idea, only a handful of projects have been able to get through the Gateway 2 process so far, but there are over 800 high-rise projects that are waiting for Gateway 2 approval. So these are developers who want to get on with building. Over 800. And remember, these aren't 800 houses. These are developments with hundreds and hundreds of homes in across the country are stuck in this regulatory nightmare, and it's going nowhere. And there is now a problem being built up because houses are getting built, but there's going to be an undersupply of apartments if this carries on. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's not suddenly going to be noticeable. But if this continues, what you're finding is there's going to be a number of years where not a lot is built in the city centres of meaningful height. There is some stuff going through, but not a lot. And that means over the next few years, that undersupply will start to take place. If this doesn't get resolved, it could be a bigger problem building up. So what does that result in? Well, it results in supply and demand imbalances. So as you have heard on this podcast and probably in the media, our population is growing significantly, mainly driven by immigration and at record levels. It's calmed down in the last year or two, but still historically way, way, way above average. All these people coming into this country need places to live, and people want to live in city centres again. That trend is changing. After COVID, people went hunting for space. But now people are comfortable with living in city centres again. And that's great. You know, there's no best or worst. It's just what's right for you. But there isn't enough being built. Places like Manchester and London and Birmingham and Leeds and others are all massively undersupplied as it is. And this problem is only going to get exacerbated further, which will push prices up in the future if this carries on, but also will push rental prices up as well because of the supply and demand imbalance. Now, this is not something that's going to play out overnight. So what I'm talking about playing out will not be really felt till much further down the line. And if it's resolved soon, it might not play out at all. But the fact we've got over 800 developments, Rob, sitting there waiting to be signed off, and the build cannot start, and that number is growing every day. And then you've got other developers just scaling down the project so they don't even bother going through it at all. To me, seems like a bureaucracy nightmare. And it's one of these things that can be fixed, but because it's political, the government's being very nervous around it, it's not being fixed. It's like a common sense problem that needs to be solved, but the government isn't being brave enough to solve this common sense problem.
No, it's tricky, isn't it? It's a bit of a no-win situation for them. But like you say, the medium to long-term effects of that are going to be noticeable because far less is being built. We've seen in the past in cities like Nottingham what's happened to rents after a period where locally they held back on any kind of development for a long time, especially higher rise development. So I think this is fascinating because this is something that I had no idea about. It's not something you really see anything about in the media. I don't think anyone really knows that this is happening, but the invisible effects could be significant. So I'm glad we're able to cover it on the podcast as a result of the conversations that you're having with developers. And of course, we'll talk about it more as hopefully it moves towards a resolution. But of course, we'll be tracking the effects of it as well. But you said earlier, Rob, that the government has been busy. The government has been busy. They've been chucking out documents all over the place over the last few weeks. There's also a new white paper that's come out on Commonhold. Now, Commonhold is basically an alternative to leasehold. We know that the government is reforming leasehold. We've talked about that in the past. But ultimately, what they want is to get rid of leasehold. And the replacement would be Commonhold, which, to radically oversimplify, means that there is no overall separate landowner. There is no lease. Everyone just owns their unit within the building. And then there's a framework for them to come together and make decisions and deal with common areas and so forth. Commonhold is not new. It's been around since 2002. But I think it's fair to say that the launch of Commonhold fell slightly short of expectations. Since it was introduced in 2002, fewer than 20 Commonhold developments have come into existence. So it has not taken the property world by storm. But what they intend to do is reboot that, actually get it started, and over time, because it will take time, establish it as the natural tenure for flats rather than leasehold. So at the moment, this is just a white paper. This is some talking about their plans. It's not become a bill yet. It's not making its way into law. So it's very, very early days. This is a very long-term thing. But we'll drop the link to that white paper in the show notes in case you're interested.
So an update on mortgages now, and Property Industry Eye is reporting that mortgage brokers are earning their money. That's because the average product stays on the market for just 16 days. And from a month ago, it was 36 days. So at the moment, if your broker feels like they're coming and going and don't know where they're quite at, well, maybe the market is the reason, because that is a fast-moving market. You really need to have your finger on the pulse. Rob and I always use mortgage brokers, not just because there's lots of products moving around, but certainly that's one of the reasons. And that does make things a little more tricky. You know, you could be locking in one product, and if you're not quick enough, it's removed from the market. So speed, action, not dithering, they are the things that you need to be doing in this current market. The good news is, though, there are many more products on the market compared to 12 months ago. In fact, over 10% more. So in March last year, just over 6,000 products on the market. And in March this year, there was 6,684. So an improvement, and more products is good news, because more products normally equals competition, and competition tends to drive down the margins and gets us all a better deal. So while the market is fast moving right now, it seems that there's lots of products in the market, lenders in the market, which overall is a good thing, and hopefully that continues.
Yeah, ask your mortgage broker if they're okay. Check in on them, because I think they're probably having a pretty busy time at the moment. Moving on, a story about rental affordability. And we talk about rents and rising rents and affordability a lot, but this is coming at it from a slightly different angle, because there's a story from the NRLA pointing out that only 5% of privately rented homes are now affordable to benefits claimants based on the level of housing benefit that they are entitled to. But that's a pretty mad stat, because when we started this podcast, what was supposed to happen was that the level of housing benefit would be set and would adjust with the market to give benefits claimants access to the bottom third of the market, effectively. That's where they set it. Then that allowance got frozen, so rents increased while the threshold didn't. And 5 years ago, that meant that only 20% of properties were available. But then they kept it frozen. I mean, they bumped up a little bit and then froze it again, but effectively it's been frozen the whole time, meaning that now, as a result, only 5% of homes are available, which shows just how much rents have increased by. But this is another of those no-win scenarios for government that we talked about, because they need private landlords. People need to be housed somewhere. There's nowhere near enough social housing. But at the same time, whenever they increase housing benefit, that money, of course, flows through to landlords. And it looks like they're just bunging a load of money to landlords. Oh, you're giving billions of pounds away to greedy landlords. It's like, well, no, the landlords are providing a service that no one else is providing. Someone has to, therefore it has to be paid for. But it just looks bad politically. And as a result of that, because the optics are not good and because there's no other solution, the result is that there is very, very little choice. And that, of course, means to afford somewhere to live, people having to find ways to top that up with funds from elsewhere. So a bit of a theme emerging today, Rob. Governments in a tricky spot, not taking the action that needs to be taken, and negative consequences as a result.
And finally, and I promise this is not an April Fool. I know April 1st has just passed, so I promise you this is genuine. But in Scotland, one of the Green Party in the Scottish Parliament has put forward proposals to permanently ban all private rental evictions in winter. That is November to March. So that's 5 months of the year that this person wants no evictions. You don't do evictions willy-nilly. It's not something you do every week. Normally, there's a very, very good reason for it. But even so, this politician in Scotland would like to see just 5 out of the 12 months that not happen at all. even if they're not paying rent. And it would be very strategic if they stop paying rent just before that 5-month period as well. Rob, this is real. It's not April Fool's. I don't think it will go through. But then the Scottish Government's done a lot of things recently with the property market that is baffling. So you never know.
Yeah, it sounds crazy, but Scottish politicians really have set the standard for mad things you can do, and things that seemed crazy have happened. So it's possible. I'm tempted to say that if they truly want to ban all evictions during the Scottish winter, then you'll only be able to evict between like July the 14th and the 17th or something like that. But I'm not going to say that because that will really offend our listeners in Scotland. And it's not true, but it would be funny.
It would. Okay, right. Now it's time for Hub Extra, the part of the show where we give you more. And Rob, you put something down here. It's going to need selling a bit because I have one of these. And at the moment, it's doing an incredible job of gathering dust. So not only sell it to everybody else, but sell it to me as well.
Yeah, I feel like I don't have enough information. I need to do some fact finding to really find out what your issue is before I make the sale. But what I put down is AeroPress. AeroPress, you probably heard of because I'm very late to the party on this. It's a way of making coffee. So if you don't have a fancy coffee machine, you don't have a French press, something like that, it's a way of making decent quality coffee quickly. And funnily enough, I've had one gathering dust for years. I got it out last week and was really impressed by it. I thought it looked like a faff. And my issue with kitchen stuff like blenders or whatever else, it's always the cleaning. I'm always put off by having loads of different pieces and you need to get all of them cleaned. AeroPress makes it really easy. You literally put in the coffee, press it down, rinse it off briefly afterwards, and it comes out really well. So I would have needed selling on it, but I was impressed, Rob. I'm surprised you found it a faff.
It just is a bit of a faff for me. I don't know if I'm impatient or maybe more accurately lazy, but I just want my coffee fast. Like, my hot water's out of a hot water tap, Rob. I haven't got time for kettles. Like, kettles are hard work. So going through the process and slowly pressing it down for however long, and then there still is a little bit of cleaning. Maybe I need to dust it off again and give it another go. Maybe I've taken my demand for instant gratification too far.
I think the statement, kettles are hard work, places you not in the target market for this product.
Maybe, and probably fair as well. Okay, right, that is us done for another week. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back, first of all, on Sunday in the Sunday Times, where we'll be answering your lovely questions there. Then we'll be doing it in audio version with Ask Rob and Rob on Tuesday, and we'll be back here, same time, same place, next week with another podcast. So until those wondrous events take place, take care, have fun. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.